Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive.
From AI-inspired insights from farmers.
If you're enjoying what we're doing here, we'd love to hear from you too.
Absolutely.
Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and definitely leave a comment telling us what you want to see more of on this deep dive.
We're always looking for new ideas, and we really value your feedback.
So what farm-related mysteries are you dying to uncover?
Right.
What questions are keeping you up at night? Let us know, and maybe we'll tackle them in a future deep dive.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are plunging into a complex but really crucial topic, the intersection of macroeconomic forces and the financial realities facing farming.
That's right. We've gathered quite a stack of sources for this dive. We've got research on inflation, specifically how it hits different sectors, detailed financials from UK farming, and then analyses of risk management for agriculture businesses, pulling insights from, well, all over places like Ghana and Romania too.
Think of this deep dive as your shortcut, really, to understanding the financial tightrope farmers walk in today's economy.
Exactly. We're going to try and unpack where the often hidden pressures come from, how global forces play a, well, sometimes surprising role.
And most importantly, explore what the sources suggest are practical ways to navigate these choppy waters.
Whether you're already farming or just thinking about getting your hands dirty, this is pretty essential stuff.
Absolutely. It can look daunting from the outside, especially when you hear about volatile markets and, rising costs. Okay, let's unpack this and jump straight into something one of our sources refers to quite vividly as the sticky squeeze. What exactly is that?
The sticky squeeze, it's a brilliant term, actually. It captures that core financial pressure. It happens when the costs of things farmers must buy their inputs rise significantly.
Okay.
And crucially, often faster than the prices of the things farmers sell their outputs. This persistent gap essentially squeezes profit margins relentlessly.
And the sources provide some really clear data on this, don't they?
They do. One source, specifically looking at the UK, highlights a deterioration in the sector's terms of trade. That's the more academic way of describing this sticky squeeze.
Right. Input prices climbing faster than output prices.
Precisely. Look at a period mentioned between 2005 and 2008. Input prices went up by a substantial 48%,
Yeah.
while output prices increased by a similar, but slightly lower, 46%. Now, that might sound close, but that small, persistent difference, maybe just 2% year after year.
On already tight margins.
Exactly. That's where the squeeze really bites and can erode viability over time. It also just signals increased price risk overall. Everything's moving more.
So it's not just that prices are changing, it's the pace. The cost increases are just outrunning the revenue increases.
That's it. And the source notes that the largest volatility, the biggest swings, hit essential items. Things like fertilizers, animal feeding stuffs, energy, lubricants.
Stuff you can't just decide not to buy.
Right. These aren't things farmers can easily substitute away from, so they're dependent on them, and their wildly swinging prices add significant unavoidable pressure to costs.
And connecting this to a broader point from one of the sources on inflation in Ghana, it seems, general inflation itself, beyond just specific inputs, can be a problem for businesses, including farms.
Yes, absolutely. That source explains that general inflation can force frequent, costly price changes for firms, both for what they buy and what they sell.
Which sounds like a nightmare just for bookkeeping.
It's more than that, though. It can actually distort the crucial information that prices are supposed to give us, making it harder to make sound business decisions based on real value signals. And critically, it encourages economic agents like farmers to spend valuable time and resources just trying to protect themselves against price instability, time that could be spent farming.
Right, hedging or forward buying or whatever, instead of focusing on production.
Exactly, which ultimately jeopardizes efficient resource allocation. So the squeeze is sticky because those higher input costs are difficult to avoid and hard to fully pass on, while the general inflationary environment just adds layers of complexity and inefficiency.
That paints a clear picture of the pressure. Now let's talk about something that can create maybe a false sense of security, the profit illusion. Sometimes when commodity prices are high, it looks like farmers are making a fortune. But the sources suggest this picture can be misleading.
It really can. High headline commodity prices, they definitely boost income, sure. And in good years, they can create the appearance of strong profitability.
Right.
But this can quickly become an illusion when you factor in the underlying, often volatile costs, and importantly, the long-term capital needs of the business.
How does that play out in the real world? Can you give an example?
Yeah, the UK source gives a really insightful illustration. It noted that periods of high profit, like during a commodity price boom, could reverse some negative trends.
Okay, like what?
For instance, it reversed a trend where money that should have been set aside for depreciation, basically saving or reinvesting to replace worn-out equipment and buildings,
Which is a real cost of doing business.
a very real cost. That money was instead being used for living expenses in leaner years. Now, while reversing that trend is good, it highlights that the profits reported in those leaner years weren't true long-term profits.
Because they weren't covering the essential costs of maintaining the farm's productive assets.
Exactly. The boom years just expose this underlying vulnerability. The insight here is that high prices might simply be allowing farms to catch up on essential investments that weren't funded by income in previous years.
So it's less making bank and more finally covering the basics that were deferred.
In many cases, yes. And this pressure on true profitability directly reduces a farm's ability to service debt. The source mentions debt service possibilities. And when those real margins get squeezed by hidden costs or insufficient capital replacement, making interest and principal payments just gets harder, increasing financial risk.
Plus, there's the added uncertainty from policy, I imagine.
Absolutely. The transparency of support payments, like the Single Payment Scheme or SBS, mentioned in the UK context, which is a significant form of direct farm support, well, that transparency makes arguments for capping or reducing those payments administratively possible.
And maybe politically easier, too?
Potentially, yes. This introduces uncertainty about a key income stream for many farms, adding another layer of precarity beneath that profit illusion.
And farm incomes are notoriously volatile anyway, year to year, right? Which must make it hard to see through the illusion sometimes.
They are incredibly volatile. That inherent year-to-year swing based on weather, markets, disease, it means that even if you have one or two seemingly good years, you really can't count on that level of income continuing.
So planning becomes very tricky.
It makes long-term planning, investment, and seeing the true profitability picture much more challenging. The profit illusion is fragile because it often doesn't account for these deeper vulnerabilities and fluctuations.
Okay, let's dig deeper into those vulnerabilities then. Beyond the obvious input costs, what are some of the specific hidden cost traps? The sources identify things that might be overlooked or underestimated by someone just looking at headline figures.
Well, the UK source details several key ones. First, circling back to input costs, there's this idea of increased dependency on purchased inputs. That's fundamental.
Meaning farms buy more stuff than they used to?
Essentially, yes. As farming has become more specialized, the reliance on external suppliers for things like fertilizers, feeds, energy, chemicals, even specialized seeds or animal genetics, it's grown dramatically.
And we already know the volatility of many of those inputs.
Right, the volatility in essentials like fertilizers, feed, and energy, where easy substitutes often just don't exist, creates significant unavoidable cost risk that can swing wildly from one season to the next. That's a big trap.
What about the money farmers borrow? Are there hidden costs there?
Financing costs are definitely a trap that can be underestimated. The source notes a historical, more than proportionate growth in exposure to variable interest rate sources.
Variable rates, okay. So
Yeah.
more risk there.
Exactly. While the proportion of total liabilities held as bank overdraft actually fell after 1986 in the UK, the sheer value of borrowing remained considerable. What's key here is the sensitivity. Even if the debt structure improved somewhat, a larger share of the cost became exposed to interest rate changes.
So a rate hike hits harder.
Potentially, yes. Interest repayments, though lower overall than some historical peaks, were still substantial, over $625 million back in 2008 in the UK context. And critically, interest payments had risen as a proportion of farm profit. There's a measure called the times interest earned, or TIE ratio,
Right.
and that was falling. A falling TIE ratio means debt servicing is getting harder relative to the profit you're making. With expectations at the time for higher commercial interest rates, this pressure was only expected to increase, adding a significant cost burden often tied to external economic forces.
So the risk shifted a bit from just the amount borrowed to the type of borrowing and its sensitivity to rates.
Exactly. Then there are capital costs beyond the initial investment, things like maintenance and repair, and crucially, capital replacement, just keeping things running and up to date.
Stuff wears out.
It does. And the source points out that net capital formation actually turned down in the UK after 1983. There was even a period of net capital consumption between 1996 and 2005.
Consumption, meaning using up assets faster than replacing them.
Yes, sector-wide. Farms were, on average, using up their capital assets, machinery, buildings, faster than they were replacing or improving them. This wasn't just a cost trap waiting to happen. It indicated a need for significant reinvestment just to maintain productivity levels in the future. And that comes with a substantial price tag down the line.
And policy changes can add costs too, right? Not just income uncertainty we talked about earlier.
Yes, definitely. The inefficient introduction of new policies, that phrase from the source, introduces not just risk, but can also directly increase operational costs. Farmers might be asked to take on more responsibility and, crucially, finance costs for things like animal disease management or specific environmental compliance measures.
New rules, new expenses.
Exactly. Things that weren't historically borne by individual farms to the same extent. These represent new burdens and expenses.
There's also a specific and potentially devastating risk related to the businesses you trade with, isn't there? Counterparty risk.
Oh, this is a major one highlighted in the UK source. And it's a hidden trap because it's external to your farm's operation, but can hit your finances incredibly hard.
So what is it exactly?
Counterparty risk is basically the danger that your trading partners, the businesses you sell produce to, like processors or retailers, or maybe buy inputs from, could go bankrupt.
And not pay you or not deliver.
Precisely. They fail to pay you for goods delivered or fail to deliver goods you've paid for. Managing this requires tightening credit control when you're selling and carefully reviewing who you do business with. The source gives the really stark example of the failed Dairy Farmers of Britain cooperative.
Oh, I remember that.
It owed farmer members an estimated £92 million when it went under. That's a huge, completely unexpected financial shock that had absolutely nothing to do with how efficiently those farmers were producing milk.
Wow. That's a risk many outside the sector might not even consider. And looking ahead, there are potential tax changes looming as well.
Yes, the risk of fiscal adjustment, as the source puts it, is always present. This just means changes in government tax policy that could impact farmers financially.
Like new taxes or losing breaks.
Exactly. It could include potential tax increases or, just as significantly, the loss of existing tax breaks that farms currently rely on. The source mentions examples like reducing fuel tax relief, potentially losing the VAT zero rating on food, which could hit diversified farm businesses like shops, or even the introduction of a new farmland property tax, similar to what exists in the U.S.
So more potential costs or income reduction?
Right. They're all potential future hits that need to be factored into planning, but they're really difficult to predict.
It really sounds like farms aren't just dealing with local weather and market dynamics anymore. They're increasingly exposed to the broader global economy.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Farming is now deeply intertwined with global forces, far more than perhaps it used to be. The UK source talks about exposure to global price movements,
Right.
driven by the increasing globalization of commodity markets. What happens with supply or demand on the other side of the world drought in Australia? Policy changes in Brazil can directly impact the prices a farmer receives or pays right here.
And exchange rates seem to play a surprisingly large role for some farms, too.
They really do, particularly when payments are set in foreign currencies,
Right.
like the single payment scheme SBS payments we discussed in the UK context, which were set in euros.
Okay.
The actual value of those payments in sterling, the actual income farmers receive in their bank account, depends directly on the sterling-euro exchange rate at the time of conversion. A relatively small 5% shift in that exchange rate, according to the source, could change total UK farming income by a really significant around 0.3 billion, or 15%.
15%, just from the currency moving.
Yes, that's a major swing tied purely to currency fluctuations, not anything happening on the farm itself.
And big global economic events like the credit crunch we saw and subsequent recessions, they have ripple effects that hit farms too.
Yes, the global credit crunch and the downturns that followed impacted many sectors, and UK agriculture wasn't immune. While the source does note the sector was generally better structured financially going into that period compared to, say, the 1980s recession.
It still felt the pinch.
It did. And the economic recession also had specific impacts on things like farm diversification activities and off-farm income sources.
Ah, so the side hustles get hit too.
Exactly. These are income streams farmers often rely on to add stability or supplement farm income. As the wider economy slows, demand for things like agritourism might fall, or maybe opportunities for a spouse's off-farm job could diminish.
So the health of the wider economy directly impacts those alternative income sources that are meant to provide a buffer.
Precisely. And the source also points to the threat of protectionism following global financial crises. Governments, feeling pressured domestically, might introduce trade barriers or state initiatives that discriminate against trading partners.
And agriculture often seems to be first in line for that kind of thing.
It often is, yes, which adds uncertainty to export markets or creates uneven playing fields.
The Ghana source also reminds us that while inflation might be a global phenomenon, country-specific and sectoral details really matter, don't they?
That's a crucial nuance. While big macro trends like global inflation or recessions create a general environment of pressure or sometimes opportunity, the specific way they impact your farm can vary greatly. It depends on your country's policies, the type of farming you do, your local market structures, even your specific debt profile.
So understand the big picture, but know your local context.
Exactly. Understanding the broad forces is necessary, but you always need to layer on the specific context.
Okay, given all these pressures and risks, the sticky squeeze, the profit illusion, these hidden cost traps, the global exposure, what do the sources suggest farmers can actually do? Is there a kind of survival playbook emerging from this research?
Fortunately, yes, the sources do offer a range of strategies and approaches. A really recurring theme emphasized by the Morning Ag Clip source is the absolute importance of just sound financial management.
Getting the basics right.
Absolutely. They stress that managing long-term debt, especially during inflation, requires a proactive approach, not just letting it sit there. And that regularly reviewing your financial statements isn't just a formality. It's key to spotting pressures early.
So keeping a really close eye on the numbers and being proactive with things like debt is foundational.
Foundational. And the UK source stresses the importance of getting the big decisions right.
Big decisions like
Decisions like land purchases or major machinery investments, these are infrequent but critical because mistakes here, maybe buying at the wrong time, over-leveraging yourself, can create significant long-term financial strain that is very, very difficult to recover from.
that's high stakes. What about managing the more day-to-day or year-to-year uncertainty?
The UK source also highlights the need for sufficient short-term flexibility. Basically, having some wiggle room to cope with different circumstances and the unpredictable nature of farming income and expenses.
Cash flow management.
Critical. Managing cash flow is absolutely critical. Having access to savings or reliable credit lines is essential for navigating those unpredictable gaps, say, when input bills are due long before the harvest is sold.
Right.
And also for taking advantage of opportunities like buying inputs before prices jump or making a timely repair that prevents a bigger breakdown. This flexibility is your buffer against volatility.
Diversification seems like a strategy often mentioned in this context, too.
It is, yes, and it comes up in both the UK and Romanian sources as a way to build resilience. Diversification, growing different crops, raising various types of livestock, or developing non-agricultural income sources.
Like agritourism or farm shops.
Exactly. Agritourism, farm shops, renewable energy generation, things like that can help stabilize incomes. The idea is to offset losses in one area with gains in another that might follow a different market cycle. The UK source notes the increasing importance and scale of on-farm diversification, as well as off-farm income, as growing factors for overall farm household stability.
So not literally putting all your eggs in one basket.
That's the classic analogy, yeah.
Yeah.
The Romanian source also mentions specific, more traditional risk management techniques like purchasing crop insurance to mitigate losses from weather, pests, or disease, and forming cooperatives.
Cooperatives, how do they help?
They can help pool resources, maybe improve bargaining power with suppliers and buyers, or share expensive equipment. Strengthen numbers, essentially.
In a world changing this fast, staying informed must also be vital, I imagine.
Crucial. Absolutely crucial. The Morning Ag Clip source advises staying informed about market trends, obviously, but also global trends that influence prices and domestic policy changes that could impact support payments or introduce new regulations.
Keeping your ear to the ground.
Constantly. They even suggest using publicly available data tools like the USDA Farm Sector Income Forecast and agricultural projections in the U.S. context to understand expected income trends, expense patterns, and debt pressures in the sector. Being informed allows you to anticipate changes and make better strategic and tactical decisions.
And if trying to pull all this together feels overwhelming, seeking help is also part of the playbook.
Definitely. The Morning Ag Clip source explicitly states, don't hesitate to seek professional financial advice. Experts who understand agricultural finance can really help you analyze your specific situation, understand your risks, and navigate the complexities of debt, investment, and future planning.
That covers a comprehensive range of strategies. Now, building on all these insights from the sources, the sticky squeeze, the hidden costs, the global links, the survival strategies, it seems we can distill a kind of framework for thinking about future-proofing your farm's bottom line. The sources don't explicitly label it this way, but the core advice seems to point towards a clear three-step approach.
Yes, I think you could synthesize the key actions suggested by these sources into a kind of framework. It's all about building resilience, really.
So what would step one be?
Step one, understand your financial landscape and risks. This is the diagnostic step. It means taking a clear-eyed, really honest look at your current financial structure, how much debt you have, what kind of debt it is, your leverage.
Knowing where you stand.
Exactly. You need to identify your specific exposures to the risks we've been talking about. Price volatility for both inputs and outputs, cash flow unpredictability based on your production cycle and market payments, potential counterparty risk with key trading partners, and your sensitivity to policy changes. Fundamentally, it means knowing your costs inside and out, all your costs, including that capital replacement we mentioned, and how they interact with revenues that can swing quite a bit.
Okay, know your numbers, know where you're vulnerable. Makes sense. What's step two?
Step two, build financial resilience and flexibility. This is the structural step, the action part based on step one. You proactively manage your debt. Maybe that means restructuring short-term, high-interest debt into more secure, longer terms if possible.
Getting the debt structure right.
Critically, ensure you have access to sufficient short-term funds, that buffer we talked about. Whether it's through dedicated savings or reliable credit lines, this is your shock absorber for cash flow gaps. And it also allows you to be tactical with purchases or sales when the timing is right.
And diversification fits here too.
Absolutely. This is where diversification fits centrally, actively exploring multiple income streams, both on-farm and potentially off-farm income too, to create sources of revenue that are less correlated with the ups and downs of your primary agricultural production.
Okay, so building buffers and alternative income streams. And step three.
Step three, stay agile and informed to adapt. This is the dynamic, ongoing step. It never really stops. Continuously monitor market trends, both domestic and global, for your specific commodities and your key inputs.
Keep watching the horizon.
Stay informed about policy developments and potential changes, shifts in support payments, new environmental regulations, potential tax adjustments, all that stuff. Use available data tools to look at projections, and again, don't hesitate to seek expert financial and technical advice when you need it. Being informed allows you to anticipate changes, adjust your strategies before pressures become crises, and hopefully seize opportunities as they arise.
That framework. Understand, build, adapt. Yeah, that really pulls together all the threads we've discussed quite nicely.
It does seem to capture the essence. It's about moving beyond just reacting to the immediate pressures and building a proactive approach based on solid financial understanding and a willingness to diversify and stay informed.
So, as you can see from this deep dive into the sources, the financial landscape for farming is indeed filled with complexity and potential pitfalls. From that fundamental sticky squeeze of rising costs to the often hidden traps of debt structure and capital replacement and the increasing impacts of global markets and policy.
Understanding these dynamics, it isn't just about weathering the storm, is it? It's really about making informed decisions for long-term viability and building a business that can actually handle volatility. The sources highlight that while some historical financial risks might have decreased over time, maybe due to structural changes in the sector.
New ones have definitely popped up.
Oh yeah. New and significant ones have certainly emerged, especially from that increased exposure to macroeconomic sources and policy shifts we discussed.
And what's fascinating here, connecting back to a broader point from one of the sources, I think the one looking cross-country, including Ghana, it's the possibility that continual levels of low inflation might not necessarily mean inflationary expectations are subdued.
Right. That's a counterintuitive idea.
Wow.
The source suggested an inverse relationship could potentially exist, in some economies at least, between low inflation and high inflation persistence.
Meaning low inflation today doesn't guarantee stability tomorrow.
It raises that question, yeah. Are we always interpreting the signs correctly? Does a period of low inflation necessarily mean future price stability is guaranteed? Or could underlying factors mean that when shocks do hit, they translate more readily into persistent inflation down the line? It's just a reminder that economic signals can be pretty nuanced.
A truly thought-provoking point to end on. We hope this deep dive gives you a clearer picture of the financial challenges in farming today and provides some actionable strategies and perhaps that framework to consider as you navigate them for your own business. We hope this exploration has been valuable. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Hitting that like button and smash that subscribe.